headlines today. President Marcos returns from the ASEAN summit in Malaysia, saying that the region is watching the U.S.-China trade war with concern. He also says his cabinet overhaul will go deeper. Transport Secretary Vince Dizon admits that the Big EDSA rehab won't solve traffic, while Metro Pacific Tollways looks into right into it we go, and President Bongbong Marcos arrived back in Manila from the ASEAN summit at around 3 a.m. this morning, Wednesday. During the two-day summit, he actively pushed to expedite a legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea, but it doesn't look like the 10-member bloc reached any major consensus there. What they did reach consensus on was related to the U.S. tariffs. ASEAN Chair and Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim said that the region agreed any deal negotiated with Washington should ensure the protection of ASEAN's interests as a whole. The bloc is watching the unfolding U.S.-China trade war with concern, especially since China is the biggest economic driver for many members of ASEAN. Marcos also said he had a chance to talk to Chinese Premier Li Qiang on the sidelines of the summit, wherein Li said they themselves don't want a trade war.
And I asked him, Premier, what do you think this will be? He says, well, we do not want any of this. They don't want this war. And I said, we're very worried because China is the biggest economic driver in the region. And of course, we watch very closely what is happening to the economy in China because it affects all of us.
President Marcos was also asked about the status of his cabinet revamp. It's been a week since he asked for the courtesy resignations of all cabinet secretaries and some heads of agencies. He said that they're doing a rigorous performance review that could go deeper than cabinet level. He also says no, he himself will not resign.
The secretaries, I think, all of them, some have to be moved around, some have chosen to leave or no longer think they can contribute. But in any case, we are looking at the problem deeply. You know, siguro by now, you know, I don't do things pang optics. If there is a problem, I like to fix it. So that's what we are doing. So expect us to be doing a rigorous performance review, not only at the cabinet level, but even deeper.
Or if you want
I will resign.
How? Yeah, that's what they want.
Ba't ko gagawin yun? At wala sa ugali ko yung tinatakbuhan ng problema. So, what good will that do?
The president was also asked about the idea of reconciling with the Dutertes. Both sides have been engaged in open warfare up until Marcos himself said in a podcast he was now open to a reconciliation coming off the back of the administration slate's poor showing in the midterm elections. Some Duterte supporters like Senator Bongo said they're also open to it if the Marcoses first bring back former President Rodrigo Duterte from The Hague.
No. That's not how reconciliation works. Okay. You don't put conditions to reconcile. When you want, if you're sincere, you want to reconcile, let's sit in front of you. Ano ba talaga problema? Ano ba, paano nangyari ito? Tanggalin natin ang problema. Pero isasabihin mo, hindi ako makikipag-usap hanggang ibigay mo sa akin ito. Eh, wala pupuntahan na.
Yeah, and that condition
tapos na. That's not reconciliation. Yes.
One other takeaway from the ASEAN summit, the Philippines will be granted a $400 million loan from the Asian Development Bank for maritime development. This was announced by ADB President Masato Kanda during the BIMP-IAGA summit in Kuala Lumpur. BIMP-IAGA stands for Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East ASEAN Growth Area. The money, expected to be approved this year, will go towards efforts to boost the country's marine ecosystem and blue economy, and in the long run, reduce the country's vulnerability to climate change impacts. Improving plastic and solid waste disposal and circularity will be part of it too. The Philippines is set to take over hosting duties for the 48th ASEAN Summit in 2026. Transportation Secretary Vince Dizon admits the rebuild of EDSA alone will not solve traffic congestion in Metro Manila. In an interview on The Big Story, Dizon acknowledged what will solve traffic is the completion of other mass transport systems like the Metro subway system and the busway in EDSA.
I think we all know that rebuilding a road is not going to solve traffic. No, what's going to solve traffic is mass transportation eventually. But we still need to fix our roads, Sean. No, we never said that the EDSA rebuild will solve traffic and will magically remove traffic from EDSA. That's not what we're saying.
The EDSA rebuild starts this June. On Monday, the No Contact Apprehension Policy, or NCAP, was re-implemented to ease traffic caused by the flagging down of traffic violators. Now, on June 13, a month-long, or is that June 16? A month-long dry run will start for the return of the odd-even scheme in EDSA. On EDSA, replacing the current number coding scheme. But already motorists are up in arms over the expected additional traffic, and many are questioning how the existing trains and buses will accommodate everyone unable to take their cars.
Trains, but we will try our best to add as many as we can. We already added 2 train sets. Right now, the maximum capacity that we feel the busway can accommodate, especially with the rebuild, of roughly about 550 buses.
Meanwhile, Metro Pacific Tollways Chair Manuel V. Pangilinan says he's open to waiving toll fees on parts of MPTC's expressway network to help ease traffic during the EDSA rehab. MPTC operates the 8-kilometer NLEX connector from Caloocan to Santa Mesa. This comes after San Miguel, the operator of the Skyway 3, agreed to waive the toll fee for some segments of tollways during the same period. All right, let's try to make sense of all of our news items from this morning. We're joined today by JC Punungbayan. He's the assistant professor at the University of the Philippines School of Economics. Good morning, JC. Thanks for getting up so early for us.
Good morning, Reg. Thanks for having me.
So much to talk about. Let me start with ASEAN, the takeaways from ASEAN. I don't know if you heard our sound bites earlier, but President Marcos touched on a lot of things. First of all, he said that the cabinet revamp may go deeper than cabinet secretary level, that they're doing a rigorous performance review, and that no, he himself will not resign because that's not going to solve anything. What did you make of this whole cabinet shakeup? It's been 6 days since it was first announced, and so far we only have a handful of names that we know are being either moved around or asked to step down.
Well, Reg, it's an understandable move on the part of President Marcos, given the poor performance of the administration's late in the past elections. But I'm afraid that first, it adds a layer of uncertainty because there are so many projects that the administration should be focusing on, and a transition such as this one, a drastic one, may delay many programs and policies of the administration. And this may derail, of course, the growth of the Philippine economy, in the sense that, well, for context, the Philippines is lagging behind many of our ASEAN neighbors, especially Vietnam. So it's interesting to see how we'll be carrying the leadership of ASEAN next year.
But, well, actually, in ASEAN, the Philippines is still registering about between 5.6 to, well, we're not at 6%, but we're still at around 5% GDP growth. So that's still pretty fast. But I know that you also have a theory that we could have gotten to 6 to 7% growth, right? What's held us back?
Yes, so the pandemic scars have become permanent, in the sense that the growth potential of the Philippines has all but become permanently lower. So 5.5% growth, as projected by the IMF, will not cut it if we want to go back to the pre-pandemic trajectory soon enough. And of course, we have to note that other ASEAN economies have been hurt by the pandemic as well. However, I'm just worried that we could, in fact, be growing a lot faster. For example, if we can attract more investments, if government can spend its spending bottlenecks, and of course, private consumption spending has been hurt by inflation since 2022, and prices are really quite high. They remain to be especially high these days, and to a certain extent, that is still hurting consumption spending growth. So these main drivers of the Philippine economy, we need to look for ways by which we can boost them.
The fact that he retained the whole cabinet team, minus DA, which is mostly considered frontline agency naman. So the fact that he retained all the members of the economic management team, does that not count for anything? I mean, shouldn't that signal at least stability, continuity?
Well, on the one hand, I mean, the economy seems to be churning along quite well. 5.5% growth is quite decent. However, there are some issues that the economic managers have approved essentially in the past couple of years. For example, the transfer of funds coming from PhilHealth going to the public coffers, as well as the approval of some questionable decisions when it comes to the national budget, including the ballooning of unprogrammed appropriations and the insertion of pork in the run-up to the 2025 elections. So there are these questionable policy decisions of the economic managers. And of course, there are some Supreme Court cases now ongoing challenging these past decisions. So I'm just wondering whether or not, or to what extent, the president took into account these decisions. But of course, we have to note that at the end of the day, the president will have approved this himself. And the cabinet simply did the bidding of the president or whoever is in charge.
You're right. That's a very good point. I mean, even Alianza's campaign manager, Toby Tiangco, told us that they feel yung budget issue really hurt the admin slate. Kasi, of course, there were a lot of questions over the quote-unquote pork allocations. And the president himself now was not happy with the budget that Congress passed. Pero what should have been done there? What signal should he have sent?
Well, I believe actually, Reg, that we should have at least a new budget secretary. For example, the current one, I'm not too sure that she understands many of the nuances of the national budget, or she could have pushed back against many of the, or kind of coordinated better with the House leadership, for example, the Senate leadership, so that we could have a better budget in the past couple of years. But she kind of nodded off on some of these decisions and didn't really do anything or push back at all. So I would argue that there could have been some changes in the mix of the economic managers as well.
That's a good point. What about yung idea ni President Marcos now to he himself oversee the budget deliberations? I mean, we are, coming up to budget proposal season, and now he's saying maybe I will oversee it himself. Is that even constitutional, do you think?
Well, I understand that President Marcos wants to have some show of force or kind of assert himself better, given the disappointing election results on his part. But I'm afraid that by intervening directly in the bicameral conference committee meetings, that is a violation of the separation of powers in the Constitution and the supposed checks and balances of the different branches on one another.
Oo nga medyo nagulat din kami dun eh. JC, I wanted to also, you're an economist, and I also wanted to pick your brains on this big issue eating at Metro Manila commuters these days. The big IDSA rehab, of course, I'm talking about, especially the return of the odd-even scheme from the 90s, which a lot of people are very unhappy about because, we feel like they kind of sprang it on us. There's only about 3 weeks to go. No one has any time to prepare. What impact do you think this might have on growth?
Well, Reg, I remember distinctly from my childhood that there was even a color coding scheme. I may remember that as well. But these are band-aid measures. In economics, there's the concept called induced demand, which essentially says that constructing more roads wouldn't be necessarily better. And from the soundbite coming from Secretary Dizon, he seems to know this. For example, people will just buy second cars so that they can still go to their offices and schools. Despite the new odd-even scheme that's going to be implemented. However, there are many insights that can be drawn from transportation economics that would be better solutions, including, for example, so-called congestion pricing, which involves charging users of private vehicles whenever they use the roads, especially during peak hours. So this one has been implemented in Singapore for a long time, and New York has implemented this more recently, and the benefits are quite stark. And then, of course, as Secretary Dizon mentioned, pushing for more public transportation and active transportation. These are the long-run solutions. I just want to say that we need to kind of revamp this whole notion of a car-centric society, car-centric infrastructure. That's not easy to do, but we should be going in that direction.
Oo nga eh. As the road advocates keep saying, move people, not cars, diba? That's what's wrong about our policies sometimes. We keep thinking about how to move cars better when we should be moving people better. But itong idea of congestion pricing, the criticism of it, and I know it's worked very well in cities like New York, for instance, but the criticism, one criticism about it in a developing country like the Philippines is that could it not be seen as elitist because only those who can afford it will be able to use the roads then?
Well, actually, the target of congestion pricing would in fact be owners of private vehicles, including, for example, the middle class, as well as the high-income class. So there are ways, for example, to exempt the vast majority of commuters who will be using public transportation. So that they don't really feel the effects of congestion pricing. The target would really be those who would be using for wheeled vehicles, for example, especially during peak hours. So it's not really elitist. In fact, it's going to hurt the upper income classes a bit more. I mean, yeah, you're right that we should be transporting people and not these vehicles per se.
That's a good way to look at it. Na talagang it does penalize the people who can afford it in a way.
Exactly.
But that has to be complemented by being able to move those who can afford cars better, right? Okay, we're gonna have to leave that there. We run out of time. Thank you so much once again for your insights. That was JC Punumbayan, Assistant Professor at the University of the Philippines School of Economics. Thanks, JC.
Thank you, Reg.
You are watching Money Talks. We're gonna go for a quick break, but coming right up, we'll take a closer look at the global and local markets. So stay with us. Also, Moody's affirms the deposit ratings of 3 Philippine banks. Keep it here on One News. back to Money Talks. I'm Regina Lay. Economic sentiment in Europe has slightly picked up slightly this month as consumers shake off some of the worries brought about by the tariffs. In a report published by the European Commission on Thursday, the EU's economic sentiment indicator in May stood at 95.2, up slightly from 94.6 in April. The EEI in the euro area is up at 94.8 this month from 93.8 in April. Confidence among consumers in the industrial sector drove overall sentiment higher, but the level for the services sector inched down. The survey was conducted ahead of Trump's threat last week to impose a 50% import tax on all EU imports rather. He later agreed to the European Commission's request to extend the deadline up until July 9th, and both sides are in talks right now. Despite the EU contending with uncertainties over the levies, the central bank is expected to cut interest rates next week as countries such as Germany and Spain forecast cooling prices. U.S. markets, let's take a closer look. And the Tuesday session sharply higher as Trump and the EU agreed to fast-track trade talks. Now let's take a look at that. Everyone in the green, all the major indices in the green. The Dow and the S&P snapped the 4-day losing streak, albeit Monday was a holiday in the U.S. Given the Memorial Day weekend. The Dow gained about 700 points, or nearly 1.8%. The S&P jumping 2%, and the Nasdaq 2.5%, taking it to just a little over 19,000, close to a record high. Benchmark 10-year Treasury yields ticked down to 4.432%, while gold prices fell to $3,300 per troy ounce. But of course, gold has been on an upward trajectory for most of this year, so that's still sitting at close to pretty high levels. U.S. futures, though, pointing to slight movements as the U.S. markets open later tonight, Manila time, with the Dow, S&P, and Nasdaq inching higher by less than 0.1%. So it's pointing towards a strong open for the benchmark indices again today. Okay, now let's take a look at the Asian markets as of 9:30 a.m. Also following the path of the U.S. markets, the ASX 200 inching up 0.4%, while South Korea's Kospi off to a strong start this morning, climbing higher by more than 1%, whilst the Japan's Nikkei still riding high on the Trump approval of the Nippon Steel takeover of U.S. Steel, higher by almost 0.8%. Back here at home, let's take a look at the Philippine Stock Exchange Index, which is trading up ever so slightly. Closed yesterday at 63.84. That's off the back of very thin trades. Again, investors constantly looking for a fresh catalyst, but nothing so far on the horizon. Trading volumes yesterday just a little over 5 billion pesos, and so this morning we're looking at a slight increase of about 0.4% as of 9:30 a.m. 64.11 is what we're seeing the local market at. It is expected to trade sideways still, as investors keep a cautious stance again on the back of lack of fresh leads. Foreigners were net sellers yesterday, with total value turnover reaching a little over 5 billion pesos. Meanwhile, the Philippine peso opened today ever slightly stronger as well, sitting at 55 at the open. It is also expected to trade sideways. No major catalyst on the horizon yesterday. Closed Tuesday at 55.56. Trading volumes were also a little light with the currency. Moody's Investor Service has affirmed the long-term deposit ratings of 3 Philippine banks amid strong liquidity and profitability. The debt watcher kept the Baa2 ratings of BDO and Bank of the Philippine Islands, as well as Metro Bank. That's for the long-term foreign currency and local currency deposit ratings of the three banks with quote-unquote stable outlooks. BDO, BPI, and Metro Bank are the country's three largest banks as of March, and Moody's says the banks are unlikely to get a rating upgrade given that they're already at the same level as the sovereign rating, the sovereign meaning the Philippine government debt. Now, the recent tax season and the government's slower spending pushed the Philippines to a budget surplus of 67 billion pesos in April. Data from the Treasury shows that this is over 57% higher than the 42.7 billion pesos recorded in the same month last year. That's the second time this year that the government posted a surplus, the other time being January. However, for the 4-month period, the government incurred a higher budget deficit of over 411 billion pesos, almost 80% higher than last year, which means net-net, we are still in the red for the year. In corporate news, Meralco capped 2024 with record-breaking numbers, exceeding profit targets and supplying power to over 8 million customers. This was announced during the company's annual stockholders meeting held on Tuesday, that's May 27th. Meralco Chair and CEO Manny Pangilinan acknowledged that the recent 25-year franchise renewal for the utility company. He also said that that's opened doors for long-term investments in renewable energy and infrastructure modernization.
Very grateful to the President for signing the bill, renewing the franchise. Of course, to Congress where the bill emanated, and to the Senate for approving the bill. No? So we're all very grateful, and it does give Meralco a longer runway so we can plan better, we can plan long-term for Meralco's future.
Beyond profits, Meralco said it strives to balance energy security, affordability, and sustainability for the benefit of every Filipino. With this, it shouldered the electric bills of consumers whose monthly consumption was 2,000 pesos or below, and also called for the removal of 10% VAT on electricity bills to ease costs for households and businesses.
Over 10% of every peso that the consumer pays. And ultimately, these amounts, if collected, once collected, we remit to the government, the appropriate government agency, or the power generating company for the pass-through component of the taxes. So certainly, removing 10% from the total bill will have impact on both the household and certain businesses. However, obviously, given all of this, there may be macroeconomic and fiscal impact, right? Then eventually there probably would be some trade-offs and other considerations.
And that's it for Money Talks today, Wednesday. I'm Regina Lake. Catch us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. here in One News. Have a great day ahead.